The saloon smelled of old whiskey, fresh coffee, and the faint metallic tang of gun oil that never quite left the air in Silver Ridge. Dawn light slanted through the tall, dust-streaked windows, painting long gold bars across the scarred pine floorboards. Clara Ma Donovan was already behind the bar, wiping glasses with the same slow, deliberate motion she'd used for 20 years, as though the rhythm could keep the world from tilting. Wyatt Thunder Harlan stood at the window, one shoulder against the frame, arms folded across his chest. The badge on his vest caught the first real sunlight and threw it back in a small, defiant flash. Out beyond Main Street, the Rockies rose sharp and indifferent, snow still clinging to the highest ridges, even though it was late spring. He watched the street wake up. A boy leading 2 mules toward the livery, a woman shaking out a rug over her porch rail, the telegraph wires humming faintly in the morning breeze like distant insects. He wanted this to be enough. Just this town, just this quiet. 6 months since the council pinned the star on him, and every day he told himself the past was buried deeper than the old placer claims up in the high country. Scout work, Indian trails, nights when the only sound was the click of a carbine being cocked. He'd left all that behind the day he rode in with nothing but a saddlebag and a letter of recommendation no one had bothered to read twice. The wanted poster hung crooked on the far wall, half torn so that only the upper half of the wolf's head remained. Black ink, jagged lines, eyes that seemed to follow you no matter where you stood. No name beneath it, no reward. Just the mark. Last week, it hadn't been there. Yesterday, someone had tacked it up. Today, it was still there and nobody had mentioned it. The silence around it felt wrong, like a held breath in a room full of talk. Clara set a tin mug of coffee in front of him without asking. Steam rose in lazy spirals. "You're staring at that window like it owes you money, Wyatt." He managed a half smile. "Just watching the sun come up, Ma." She snorted softly. "Sun comes up every day. You're watching for something else." Before he could answer, the batwing doors swung in. Deputy Diego Ace Montoya stepped through, spurs chiming once against the floorboards. He was already wearing the day's dust, hat pushed back, eyes tired but sharp. He crossed to the bar, nodded at Clara, then looked straight at Wyatt. "Morning, Sheriff." The word carried just enough edge to cut. "You sleep all right?" "Well enough." Ace leaned an elbow on the bar. "Heard some riders pass the North Ridge last night. 3, maybe 4. Didn't stop. Didn't need to. They left tracks wide enough for a blind man to follow." Wyatt kept his gaze on the street. "Lots of riders in these parts. Not ones who stopped long enough to carve a wolf's head into the cottonwood by the ford." Ace's voice dropped. "Folks are talking, Wyatt. Saying maybe the council picked the wrong man for the job. Saying a greenhorn with a fancy nickname ain't gonna stop what's coming." The word greenhorn landed like a slap, soft but deliberate. Wyatt felt the old reflex rise. Clench the jaw, let the anger coil, then force it down. He'd heard worse in army camps. He'd heard worse from men who died the next day. But here, in this saloon that smelled like home, it stung different. He turned slowly. "You one of 'em saying it, Ace?" Ace held his eyes a long beat. "I'm saying what I hear, and I'm saying you better start listening before the talk turns into something worse." Wyatt looked back at the window. A lone rider had appeared at the far end of Main Street, walking his horse slow. Black hat, black duster, the kind of silhouette that made the hair on your neck stand up without reason. The man reined in opposite the saloon, sat there a moment, then lifted his head and looked straight through the glass at Wyatt. No words, no gesture. Just that long, measuring stare. Wyatt felt the coffee go cold in his hand. The rider touched his hat brim once, mock salute. Then spurred the horse into a slow lope and disappeared around the corner toward the canyon road. Clara's cloth stopped moving. Ace straightened, hand drifting toward his holster out of old habit. Wyatt set the mug down carefully. The clink sounded too loud in the sudden quiet. He could walk away now. Turn in the badge, ride out before the first real shot was fired. No one would blame a man for wanting to stay breathing. He could still choose the quiet life he'd come here for. But the rider had seen him, and the wolf on the wall was no longer just a drawing. Wyatt exhaled once, slow and steady, the way a man does when he knows the next breath might cost him something he can't get back. He straightened, fingers brushing the weight of the badge one last time, then stepped toward the door. Outside, the morning wind carried the faint, distant smell of pine smoke, and somewhere up in the ridges, something was already moving closer. The sheriff's office sat at the ragged edge of Silver Ridge, a low adobe building with a sagging porch and a single window that looked out on nothing but scrub pine and the long, empty road to the canyon. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of old paper, lamp oil, and the faint metallic bite of gun-cleaning solvent. Wyatt Harlan sat at the scarred oak desk, the only real piece of furniture the council had bothered to provide, going through a thin stack of reports that told him less than he already knew. The wanted poster from the saloon had followed him here. He'd taken it down himself that morning, folded it once, and tucked it into the bottom drawer. Now it lay open again on the desk like an accusation. The wolf's head stared up at him. Ink faded at the edges, but the eyes still sharp. He hadn't asked anyone about it. Not yet. He rubbed the heel of his hand against his forehead, trying to push back the low throb that had settled there since the rider passed the saloon at dawn. Fear wasn't new to him. Scout work had taught him its shape, its weight. But this was different. This wasn't a war party on a ridgeline or a sniper's glint in the rocks. This was a town that had started to look at him sideways, and the sideways glances were starting to feel like knives. The door creaked open without a knock. Deputy Chief Caleb Iron Whittaker stepped in, boots heavy on the plank floor. He was a big man, shoulders wide from 30 years of ranch work before the badge, face lined like old leather left too long in the sun. He carried a folded sheet of foolscap and dropped it on the desk without preamble. 2 ranchers out by Willow Creek got hit last night, Caleb said. His voice was flat, careful. Not robbed outright, just told to pay up or watch their hay burn. They paid, in silver, left a mark on the barn door, same as that thing you got there. He nodded at the poster. Wyatt looked at the report. Neat handwriting, Caleb's. 2 names, amounts, dates. Nothing about who delivered the threat. Nothing about why. They mention names? Wyatt asked. Caleb shook his head. Didn't need to. One of them saw red hair under the mask. Tall man. Called himself Red. Said the next visit wouldn't be so polite. Wyatt felt the word settle in his gut like cold lead. Cole Red Voss. One of the Voss brothers. He'd heard the name in passing from old army dispatches. Outlaw stock, quick with a knife, quicker to hold a grudge. If Red was already riding close enough to leave marks on doors, the shadow riders weren't testing the water anymore. They were wading in. He closed the folder. Anyone else see him? Enough folks to start talk. Caleb leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. Word spreading you're the reason they're bold enough to come this close. Saying a greenhorn sheriff makes easy pickings. Wyatt didn't answer right away. He stood, walked to the open window, and looked out. The afternoon sun was slanting low, turning the dust motes into slow gold sparks. Down the street, a knot of men stood outside the general store, heads together, voices low. One of them glanced toward the office, then away fast. He could still pretend. could file the report, tell Caleb to keep an eye out, and go back to hoping the trouble would pass like a summer storm. But the mark on the barn door wasn't going away, and neither was the memory of that black duster rider staring through the saloon glass. The telegraph key in the corner clattered suddenly, sharp and insistent. Emma Sparks Whitaker, Caleb's niece, the town's one-woman wire service, leaned in from the back room, sleeves rolled to her elbows, a smudge of ink on her cheek. "Message just came through from the stage relay at Pine Gap," she said. "Riders moving south along the old cattle trail, 4, maybe 5. Black hats, one carrying a Spencer carbine. They asked the station man if Silver Ridge had a new sheriff yet. He said yes. They laughed." Wyatt turned. Emma's eyes were steady, but there was a flicker in them, something close to worry. She was young, sharp as a tack with the wire, but she'd never seen a real fight up close. Not like this. "They give a name?" he asked. She shook her head. "Just said to tell the Thunder Boy they'd be paying respects soon." The nickname landed like a slap. Thunder. Something he'd earned once, in a canyon full of smoke and screaming horses, when the only way out was straight through. Now it sounded like mockery. Caleb watched him. "You gonna do something about it, Wyatt? Or we just waiting for him to carve that wolf on your door next?" Wyatt looked back at the window. The knot of men outside the store had grown. One of them, a rancher named Ellis, who'd promised men and horses if things got bad, was shaking his head, slow and deliberate. The words came out before he could stop them. "Tell Ellis I'll handle it." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "Handle it how?" Wyatt didn't answer. He walked to the desk, opened the drawer, and took out the folded wanted poster. He smoothed it flat, then pinned it back on the wall with a rusty tack. The wolf stared out again, bolder now. He could still pull back. Could ride out tonight, leave the badge on the desk, and let Silver Ridge sort its own mess. But the rider had asked for thunder, and Red Voss had already left his mark. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of distant pine smoke. Somewhere up the canyon trail, a horse nickered once, then fell silent. Wyatt closed the window. The latch clicked shut with a small, final sound. He stood there a long moment, listening to the telegraph key tick once more in the quiet room, and felt the first real weight of the star settle against his chest. Not pride, not duty, just the slow, cold certainty that silence was no longer an option. And somewhere on the trail, Rufus Blade Kane was already smiling at the name he'd just learned. The church stood at the quiet end of Main Street, whitewashed pine boards gone gray from too many winters, its steeple cutting a thin shadow across the graveyard out back. Inside, the air was close and thick with the scent of old hymnals, candle wax, and the faint must of wool coats worn too long. Lanterns hung from the rafters, throwing soft yellow pools across the pews where maybe 40 people sat. Ranchers with calloused hands folded in their laps, storekeepers still in aprons, women clutching shawls against the evening chill that seeped through the cracks. Reverend Elias Thorne stood at the pulpit, tall and spare, voice low and steady like a man who'd buried more friends than he cared to count. "We've come to talk plain," he said. "No sermons tonight, just what's real." Wyatt Harlan sat near the back, hat on his knee, badge hidden under the fold of his coat. He'd come because Thorne had asked, quietly after supper, and because staying away would have looked worse than showing up. The pew creaked under him every time he shifted. He kept his eyes on the floorboards, tracing the worn paths where boots had walked for decades. The talk started slow. A rancher named Ellis cleared his throat. "They hit my place last night. Not much, Just enough to make the point. Said next time it's the barn. Said the sheriff ain't gonna stop him. He glanced toward the back, not quite meeting Wyatt's eyes. Folks are wondering if that's true. Murmurs rippled through the room, low and uneasy. A woman in the third row, Mrs. Hargrove, who ran the boarding house, spoke up. I heard they got a paper. Some kind of warrant. Says our new sheriff got the job on account of friends in high places. Not merit. Not experience. Wyatt felt the words settle like dust in his lungs. He'd heard the whisper before. But hearing it spoken aloud in this place made it heavier. He could stand up right now, tell them the truth. That the letter from the territorial governor had come after he'd already turned down 3 bigger posts. That he'd come here to disappear into the quiet, not to play hero. But the words stuck. Saying them would mean opening the door to questions he wasn't ready to answer. About the canyons, the smoke, the names he'd left behind. Clara, Ma. Donovan sat 2 rows ahead, back straight, hands clasped tight in her lap. She hadn't spoken yet. Wyatt watched her shoulders rise and fall, slow and deliberate. Last night, after the rider passed the saloon, she'd found a note slipped under the door. A single sheet of rough paper with the wolf's head drawn in charcoal and 3 words beneath it. Pay or burn. She hadn't told anyone but him. Not yet. The Reverend raised a hand for quiet. We're not here to point fingers. We're here to decide what we do next. A young ranch hand stood up. Tom, barely 20, voice cracking with nerves. What if we just pay? They'll move on. Always do. Clara turned then. Her voice cut through the room, calm but edged. They won't move on. They'll stay. When the money runs dry, they'll take more than coin. They'll take the town. Silence followed. Wyatt felt it press against his ribs. Clara's saloon was the heart of Silver Ridge. Neutral ground, where deals were made, news passed, and folks remembered they weren't alone. If it burned, the town would lose more than a building. It would lose the last place people could pretend things were normal. He stood before he realized he was going to. The pew groaned. Heads turned. I'm not going to stand here and pretend I got all the answers, he said. His voice came out quieter than he meant, rough around the edges. Some of you think I got this badge because someone owed someone else a favor. Maybe that's half true. But I took it because I thought I could keep things steady. Keep folks safe. He paused. The lanterns flickered. They're already hitting close. Saloon got a note last night. Same mark, same threat. A low breath went through the room. Clara didn't look at him, but her hands tightened until the knuckles showed white. Wyatt went on. I've heard things. Whispers. The riders ain't one solid pack. There's a split. One man wants it all, hard and fast. Another wants a bigger cut, less blood. They're turning on each other already. He stopped there. Didn't say how he knew. Didn't say he'd ridden out at dusk yesterday, followed a faint trail to a dry wash where Cole, Red Voss, had met a lone rider in black. Didn't say he'd watched from the rocks, heart hammering, while Voss argued in low tones about the greenhorn sheriff and Blade's plan. Didn't say he'd slipped closer after, caught the name little Sarah Voss, Red's niece, maybe daughter, mentioned in the same breath as regret. He'd made the choice then, in the gathering dark. Approach the man who might flip. Offer a way out for the girl's sake. It wasn't noble. It was desperate. And it might get Voss killed, or Wyatt himself, if it went wrong. Now, in the church, he looked at Clara. She met his eyes for the first time that night. There was no gratitude there, only a quiet, tired understanding. She'd already paid the first price. Half her evening crowd gone, tables empty, the piano silent. Wyatt sat back down. The Reverend nodded once, then closed the meeting with a short prayer. People filed out slowly, boots scuffing, voices low. No one spoke to Wyatt on the way past. Outside, the night had turned cold. Stars sharp overhead. Clara waited on the steps, shawl pulled tight. She didn't look at him when he joined her. "They'll come for the saloon first," she said, "to make an example." "I know." She turned then. "You planning to do something about it, Wyatt? Or we just waiting for the match?" He looked down the street toward the dark shape of the saloon, its windows glowing faint orange. Somewhere inside, the wolf's head was still tacked to the wall. He exhaled once, breath fogging in the chill. "I'm planning." She studied him a long moment. Then she nodded, just once, and walked away toward the lights. Wyatt stayed on the steps until the last lantern in the church went out. The wind carried the faint scent of pine and something sharper, smoke, maybe, from a distant fire. Or maybe just the promise of one closer to home. The saloon was almost empty by the time the last drunk stumbled out into the night. The piano sat silent under its dust cloth. Keys yellowed like old teeth. A single oil lamp burned low on the bar, throwing long, trembling shadows across the room. The smell of spilled beer and wood smoke hung heavy, mixed now with something sharper. Fear, maybe, or just the stale sweat of a place that knew it was being watched. Clara, Ma. Donovan stood behind the bar, wiping the same spot on the scarred oak for the third time that hour. Her movements were slow, mechanical, the way a person works when they're trying not to think too hard. The wolf's head was carved deep into the counter now, not charcoal this time, but knife work, fresh and angry. The edges still showed pale wood beneath the dark stain. Someone had done it while she was in the back fetching a bottle. She hadn't heard a thing. Wyatt Harlan sat on the far side of the bar, elbows planted, hands clasped around an untouched glass of water. The badge on his chest felt heavier tonight, like a stone tied to his ribs. He hadn't taken his coat off. The wind outside rattled the shutters, carrying the faint, distant sound of horses moving in the dark. Clara finally set the rag down. "They left a message with a note," she said. Her voice was quiet, almost conversational. "Rider came in just after sundown. Black hat. Didn't even dismount. Said if the sheriff don't back off, this place burns tomorrow night. Said it was from Cade himself." Wyatt looked at the carving. The lines were rough, hurried, but deliberate. He could picture the man, Cade Black Harlan, leaning over the bar in the half-light, knife in hand, smiling while he worked. The same Harlan who'd once ridden scout trails with men Wyatt had known. Different last name, same kind of cold. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded sheet of paper, creased from being carried too long. "This came to me yesterday," he said. "Left in the livery stall under my saddle blanket. No signature, but I know the hand." Clara took the paper without touching the bar. She unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was tight, hurried. "Cade wants blood. Blade wants coin. They'll kill each other before they finish us. I got a girl, Sarah. She's 8. Goes to the schoolhouse. I don't want her growing up in this. Tell me what you need." HV Clara's eyes lifted to Wyatt's. "Harlan Voss?" Wyatt nodded once. "Black Voss, one of the brothers, Red's kin. I followed him out to the dry wash 2 nights back. Heard him argue with a rider about Blade's plan, something about cutting Cade out, taking the town for themselves." Voss sounded scared. Not of us, of what happens if they keep going. He paused. The lamp wick sputtered, throwing a brief flare across Clara's face. She looked older tonight, lines deeper around her eyes. "I rode back before dawn," Wyatt went on. "Left him a note in the same stall. Told him if he wanted a way out for the girl, he had to give me something real. This is what he gave." Clara folded the letter again. "You trust him?" "No," Wyatt said. "But I trust what a father'll do when he's cornered. And he's cornered." Silence stretched between them. Outside, a horse snorted once, far off. The wind moaned under the eaves. Clara looked at the wolf carved into her bar. "I've fed half this town for 20 years. Watched their kids grow up at these tables. Tonight there were 3 men in here all evening. 3. They left early. Said they didn't want trouble following them home." Her voice cracked just a little. "I can't lose this place, Wyatt. It's all I got left of my own." Wyatt felt the words hit like a slow punch. He'd come here to disappear, to let the quiet swallow the memories of smoke and blood and men screaming names he still heard in his sleep. Instead, the quiet had turned on him. And now Clara, Ma Donovan, who'd poured his first coffee the day he rode in, was paying for his choice to stay. He stood up. The stool scraped back. He took the letter from her hand, held it over the lamp chimney. The paper caught quick, orange flame licking up the edges. He watched it burn until the last corner curled black, then dropped the ash into an empty spittoon. "That's done," he said. "No more waiting for them to decide when it ends." Clara watched the last spark die. "What now?" Wyatt looked toward the doors. "I start talking to people who'll listen. Caleb, Ace, Reverend Thorne, anyone who'll ride when it matters. We use the fair next week. Make 'em think they're coming for us, but we'll be waiting." He didn't say the rest. That if Voss was lying, or if Cade smelled the turn, the first match might land here tonight. That people could die, good people, quiet people, because he'd finally stopped running. Clara reached across the bar and touched his wrist. Her hand was cool, steady. "You're scared," she said. Not a question. Wyatt didn't pull away. "Yeah," he admitted, "but not enough to walk." She let go, nodded once. "Then go do what you gotta do." Wyatt walked to the doors, pushed them open. The night air hit him cold and clean, carrying the scent of pine and distant wood smoke. Out beyond the last buildings, at the edge of the ridge where the trail dropped into the canyon, a small fire flickered. Too small for a camp, too steady for accident. Someone had lit it deliberately. A signal. A promise. He stood there a long moment, coat open to the wind, badge catching the faint glow from inside. The fire blinked once, like an eye opening in the dark. Tomorrow night, that fire might be here. Wyatt let the doors swing shut behind him. The latch clicked softly, final as a hammer on an empty chamber. He started walking toward the sheriff's office, boots quiet on the boardwalk, the weight of the star pulling harder with every step. The trail out to Willow Creek wound narrow between stands of ponderosa pine, the ground soft with fallen needles and the faint tracks of cattle that had been driven hard. Smoke still rose in thin gray columns from the blackened hay shed when Wyatt rode up. The smell of charred timbers sharp enough to sting the eyes. Dawn had barely broken, the sky a bruised gray, and already the air felt heavier, like the mountains themselves were leaning in to watch. Ellis's place sat low against the ridge, a small log house with a porch sagging under the weight of years. The barn door hung crooked, the wolf's head painted fresh in black tar across the planks, big enough to be seen from the road. Half the hay shed was gone, reduced to glowing embers and twisted iron straps. A few steers milled in the corral, restless, lowing softly. The rest were gone. Ellis stood in the yard, arms folded, face streaked with soot. His wife, Martha, sat on the porch steps with their 2 boys clutched close, blankets wrapped tight against the morning chill. The boys weren't crying anymore. They just stared at the smoke like it might explain why everything had changed overnight. Wyatt reined in, slow, dismounted, boots sinking into the ash-dusted ground. Diego Ace Montoya and Caleb Iron Whitaker rode in behind him, silent, faces hard. They didn't speak. There was nothing to say that the burned hay couldn't say louder. Ellis looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed, not from smoke. "They came just after midnight," he said. 3 of them. Masks. One had red hair showing under his hat. Said this was a reminder. Said the next one would be the house if I didn't pay double by week's end. He gestured toward the corral. Took 12 head. Best stock I had. Left me enough to keep the family fed, but not enough to make it through winter without selling off land. Wyatt felt the words settle low in his gut. Ellis had been one of the few who'd shaken his hand the day the badge went on. Promised men and horses if trouble came. Now the promise was ash under their boots. "I'm sorry," Wyatt said. The words sounded thin, useless. Ellis gave a short, bitter laugh. "Sorry don't bring back the cows, or the hay, or the sleep we won't get tonight wondering if they come back." Martha stood up slowly. "We're packing what we can carry," she said. "Heading to her sister's in Pine Gap till this blows over. If it blows over." Wyatt looked at the boys. The older one, maybe 10, met his eyes for a second, then looked away. Something in that glance cut deeper than the smoke. Back in town, the church filled again that afternoon. Reverend Elias Thorne had called the meeting without fanfare. Just word passed quiet from porch to porch. People came anyway, more than before. The pews were full, and folks stood along the walls, hats in hands, faces drawn. Thorne spoke first, voice steady, but tired. "We've lost enough already. Ellis and Martha are leaving today. Others are thinking the same. We can scatter or we can stand. But standin' means facing what's coming together." Wyatt stood when Thorne nodded to him. The room went still. He could feel every pair of eyes, some hopeful, some angry, some just scared. "I've got a plan," he said. "It ain't pretty and it ain't safe. We use the annual cattle drive fair next week. They'll come thinking we're distracted, thinking the town's ripe. We let 'em think that. We make the saloon the bait, Ma Donovan's place. They've already marked it. We turn that mark against 'em." He paused. The lanterns hissed softly overhead. "I've got someone inside," he continued. "Harlan Voss, one of their own. He's feeding me pieces because he's got a daughter, little Sarah, who don't deserve to grow up in what they're building. He says they're planning big for the fair. Cade wants to break us hard. Rufus Blade wants to bleed us slow. They're already fighting over how to do it." Murmurs rose, then fell. Clara Donovan sat in the front row, back straight, but her hands trembled once before she clasped them tight. Wyatt went on. "Emma Sparks'll send telegraph messages. Fake ones, routed through relays so they look real. We'll feed Voss just enough to plant doubt. Make Cade think Blade's selling him out. Make Blade think Cade's planning to cut him loose. If they turn on each other before they reach us, we've got a chance to take 'em when they're divided." He looked around the room. "It means risk. The saloon could burn. Folks could get hurt. I won't lie, some probably will. But if we do nothing, they'll take everything slow, piece by piece, like they took Ellis's herd." Silence followed. Then Caleb Whitaker spoke from the back. "I'm in. Ace?" Ace nodded once, jaw tight. Yeah. One by one, others murmured agreement. Ranchers, storekeepers, even Tom, the young hand who'd wanted to pay them off last time. Not everyone. Some slipped out quiet, heads down. Wyatt stepped down. Clara caught his eye as he passed. She didn't smile. She just nodded once, like a woman who'd already accepted the cost. Outside, the sky had turned the color of old iron. Smoke from Ellis's place drifted over the ridge, thicker now, spreading across the valley like a stain. The wind carried it down Main Street, into open windows, into lungs. People coughed, looked up, then looked away. Wyatt walked to the edge of town with Ace and Caleb. They stopped where the trail climbed toward the fairgrounds. In the distance, the hay fire had jumped. Small flames licking along the dry grass toward the tree line. Not big yet, but growing. Ace spat into the dust. That's gonna burn all night. Wyatt watched the orange glow flicker against the darkening sky. The fair was 4 days away. 4 days until the trap either worked or failed. 4 days until the saloon might become nothing but embers and memory. He turned back toward town. The smoke kept rising, slow and relentless, blotting out the first stars. Somewhere in the ridges, horses moved. Not loud, just enough to remind everyone listening that time was running thin. The sheriff's office smelled of coffee gone cold, lamp soot, and the faint dry rot of old wanted posters curling at the edges. Dawn light came thin through the single window, gray and reluctant, barely touching the map spread across the desk. Silver Ridge lay marked in pencil. Saloon circled twice. Fairgrounds hatched in red. Canyon trails dotted with question marks. Wanted sheets covered the walls like peeling wallpaper, faces half forgotten, names that meant nothing until they did. Wyatt Harlan sat motionless in the chair, elbows on the desk, fingers steepled against his lips. He hadn't slept. The badge lay beside his right hand, not pinned to his vest for once, as though taking it off might give him one last hour of pretending he could still walk away. The room was quiet, except for the soft tick of the wall clock and the occasional creak of settling timbers. A sealed envelope waited on the blotter, delivered by a territorial courier at first light. The wax bore the judge's seal. Harlan Crow, Territorial Court. Wyatt had opened it once, read it twice, then let it lie. The words were polite, official, edged with ice. Sheriff Harlan, your recent reports on the so-called shadow riders are noted. However, the court requires a full accounting of your actions, including any informants or unofficial arrangements. Failure to comply within 48 hours will necessitate further inquiry into possible collusion with criminal elements. The territory cannot tolerate divided loyalties. Respectfully, Judge Harlan Crow. The threat was buried in the courtesy, clear as a drawn knife. Collusion. The word alone could end him. Badge gone, name blackened, town turned against him before a shot was fired. And Crow wasn't acting alone. Wyatt had seen the name Silas in dispatches years ago. Colonel Elias Silas Crow, the judge's brother, a man who'd made fortunes on railroad land grants and broken men to get them. He rubbed his thumb along the scar on his left knuckle, an old scout wound from a Cheyenne knife that had come too close. The memory rose unbidden. Smoke thick enough to choke, horses screaming, men he'd ridden with dying in the dirt while he crawled through the rocks to flank the line. He'd earned thunder that day, not for bravery, but for the way the carbine cracked when everything else was breaking. Now the name felt like a lie people told to make themselves feel safe. Footsteps on the porch. Wyatt straightened, hand drifting toward the Colt on his hip out of habit. Harlan Black Voss slipped inside without knocking, hat low, coat collar turned up. He looked smaller in daylight, hollow-eyed, jaw tight. He carried a folded oilcloth packet, edges worn from being hidden in a saddlebag. "You're late," Wyatt said quietly. "Had to make sure no one followed." Voss set the packet on the desk. "This was on a rider I caught coming down the North Trail last night. He won't be talking to anyone else." Wyatt unfolded the oilcloth. Inside lay a single letter, sealed with red wax, addressed to Cade Black Harlan. The handwriting was precise, educated. He broke the seal. The contents were brief. See. "Proceed as discussed. The fair provides cover. Take the saloon first. Make it public. The judge will handle the aftermath. Silver Ridge must fall cleanly. No loose ends. Payment upon confirmation. S.C. Wyatt read it twice. S.C. Silas Crow." The link he'd suspected but never held in his hand until now. Voss shifted. If Cade sees that, he'll know Blade's been playing both sides. Or maybe he'll think the judge is cutting him out. Either way, they tear each other apart before they reach town. Wyatt folded the letter carefully. "You understand what this means if it goes wrong." Voss looked at the floor. "I know. But Sarah, she's asking why her uncle don't come home no more. I can't let her grow up thinking this is normal. I can't." Wyatt studied the man. Fear lived in Voss's eyes, but so did something harder. Regret, maybe, or the ghost of a father who still wanted to be worth something. He stood, walked to the lamp, and held the letter over the chimney. Flame caught the corner, crawled up the paper slow. Voss watched without speaking. When only ash remained, Wyatt let it fall into the tin cup on the desk. "This goes in the trap," Wyatt said. "We plant it where Blade finds it. Let him think Cade's selling him to the judge. Let Cade think Blade's gone to the law. They'll come at each other before they come at us." Voss nodded once. "I'll make sure it gets where it needs to." Wyatt met his eyes. "If this blows up in our faces, they'll say I colluded with you. That I used an outlaw to save my own skin. My name will be dirt. Yours too." "I know," Voss said softly. "But if we do nothing, Sarah's future is dirt anyway." Wyatt looked back at the map. The fairgrounds were circled in red. 3 days left. 3 days until the trap either snapped shut or snapped on them. Voss turned to go. At the door, he paused. "Thank you for giving me a chance to be something else to her." Wyatt didn't answer. The door closed softly behind Voss. A moment later, the telegraph key in the corner clattered to life, sharp, urgent. Emma Sparks Whitaker appeared in the doorway from the back room, face pale, slip of paper in her hand. "Wire from the territorial line," she said. "Judge Crow's sent in investigators. Arriving tomorrow, under orders to review local enforcement practices. They're coming straight here." Wyatt took the paper. The words blurred for a second. Investigators. Official. Armed with warrants and questions, and the power to strip him bare before the fair even started. He set the paper down. The clock ticked on. Outside, the first real light of day touched the ridge, turning the lingering smoke from Ellis's place into pale gold. Wyatt looked at the empty chair where Voss had sat, then at the badge still lying on the desk. He reached for it slowly, fingers closing around the cool metal. The telegraph key clicked once more, a single final note in the quiet room, like the last breath before the storm broke wide open. The annual Cattle Drive Fair had always been the one night Silver Ridge forgot to be afraid. Lanterns strung along Main Street swayed in the warm night breeze, casting pools of amber light over planked tables laden with cornbread, smoked venison, and jars of peach preserves. Children darted between legs, laughing sharp and bright, while a lone fiddler sawed away on the porch of the general store, notes rising thin and wild against the low murmur of voices. The smell of wood smoke and roasting corn drifted everywhere, sweet and heavy, almost enough to cover the faint, acrid trace of distant burning hay that still lingered on the wind. Wyatt Harlan stood near the edge of the crowd, coat open, badge glinting dull under the lanterns. He looked calm, hands loose at his sides, eyes scanning slow. But inside his chest, something had gone quiet and steady. The way a man feels when he knows the next breath might be the last easy one. He had accepted it hours ago, in the dim light of his office. Victory tonight would not be clean. It would carry scars, and some of them would never fade. The fiddler paused to rose in his bow. In the sudden hush, Wyatt heard it, the soft thunder of hooves coming in from two directions at once. North and south. Two groups. Exactly as Voss had promised. He touched the butt of his Colt once, then let his hand fall. No heroics. Just the plan. Emma Sparks Whitaker slipped up beside him, face pale but steady under her hat brim. She carried no telegraph key tonight, only a small signal lantern hooded in red cloth. "Last wire sent an hour ago," she whispered. "The one that says Blade sold Cade out to the judge. And the reply from the relay, fake, but it'll look real enough when it reaches them." Wyatt nodded once. "Good. Keep the hood ready. When you see my signal, light it. Posse moves on the flash." She swallowed. "Clara's still in there. She wouldn't leave." "I know." The first riders appeared at the north end of the street. Cade Black Harlan at the head, black duster flapping, face shadowed under his hat. 20 yards behind, another group swung in from the south. Rufus Blade Kane, lean and furious, red scarf loose at his throat. Both groups slowed when they saw each other. Tension crackled across the fair like dry lightning. The fiddler stopped altogether. Children were pulled back by mothers. Laughter died. Cade reined up hard in front of the saloon. "Blade," he called, voice carrying clear and cold. "You got business here?" Blade spurred forward a step. "Only business I got is with you, Cade. Heard you been talking to the judge, selling us out." Cade laughed once, short and ugly. "Funny. I heard the same about you." The crowd parted like water. Wyatt stepped forward slow, boots deliberate on the packed dirt. Inside the saloon, Clara Ma Donovan stood behind the bar, shotgun laid flat on the wood, hands steady but knuckles white. A few stragglers, old men too stubborn to run, huddled near the back wall. The first shot came from outside, someone in Blade's group, nervous, firing high. Glass shattered in the front window. Screams rose. People scattered. Chaos erupted. Cade's men wheeled toward Blade's. Blade's men returned fire. Bullets tore through the saloon's front wall, splintering wood, punching holes in the tin ceiling. Tables overturned. A lantern crashed, oil spreading in a bright, hungry pool. Clara ducked as glass rained down. A slug clipped her shoulder, shallow, but it burned like fire. Blood bloomed dark on her apron. She hissed through her teeth, pressed her palm to the wound, and stayed upright. Outside, Wyatt raised his hand. Emma uncovered the lantern. Red light flashed once, sharp, unmistakable. From the shadows of the livery and the church alley, the posse moved. Diego Ace Montoya leading one wing, low and fast. Caleb Iron Whitaker the other, shotgun already racked. They closed on the saloon like jaws. Inside, the riders were turning on each other now. Fists, knives, curses. Harlan Black Vaugh stood in the center of the melee, hesitated one heartbeat, then threw his revolver to the floor with a clatter. "Enough," he shouted. "I'm done." Heads turned. Cade spun, eyes narrowing. "Traitor," Wyatt stepped through the broken doors, Colt leveled. The room stank of powder smoke and blood. "Cade Harlan," he said, voice cutting through the din like a blade. "You're under arrest." Cade laughed again, wild, furious. He raised his pistol. Wyatt fired once, high, into the ceiling. Plaster rained. The sound shocked the room still. "Stand down," Wyatt said, "or the next one's in you." Cade froze. Blade, bleeding from a graze on his cheek, looked between them. Confusion twisting into rage. Wyatt reached into his coat, pulled the charred corner of Silas Crow's letter, enough left to read the signature. He held it up. "This came from Colonel Silas Crow," he said, loud enough for every man in the room to hear. "Your paymaster, the judge's brother. He wanted the town broken so he could buy it cheap. You were just the hammer." Silence fell, heavy as lead. From the street, hoofbeats, hard official. U.S. Marshal Gideon Blackwood rode in at the head of 6 men, badges gleaming under lantern light. They dismounted fast, carbines leveled. Blackwood stepped inside. "Colonel Elias Crow and Judge Harlan Crow are in custody down the trail. They won't be leaving free men." Cade's pistol wavered. Blade cursed once, low. Wyatt lowered his Colt. "Drop it." Cade's hand opened. The gun hit the floor. The posse moved in. Cuffs clicking, men shoved against walls. Voss stood apart, head bowed, hands empty. Outside, a shout went up. Fire had caught in the spilled oil, small at first, then leaping up the dry curtains. Flames licked the ceiling beams, smoke poured thick and black. Clara staggered out through the broken doors, shoulder wrapped in a torn tablecloth, blood soaking through. She stopped in the street, staring at the saloon as the roof timbers groaned. Wyatt reached her side. "Ma!" She looked up at him. Her eyes were dry, but the pain in them was raw. Gratitude and grief tangled together. "We held," she whispered. "But look what it cost." The fire cracked louder. Sparks lifted into the night sky, bright against the smoke that now covered the stars like a shroud. Wyatt stood beside her, the heat of the flames warming one side of his face, the cold night air the other. The fair had ended. The town was still standing, but changed. And in the distance, thunder rolled once. Low, distant, like the mountains themselves were answering. He didn't move. Neither did she. They just watched the saloon burn. The morning after came slow and gray over Silver Ridge, the kind of light that doesn't hurry to forgive. Smoke still drifted in lazy spirals from the blackened skeleton of Ma Donovan's saloon, curling up past the ridge like the last breath of something that refused to die easy. The air tasted of charred pine and wet ash, thick enough to coat the tongue. Down Main Street, the fairgrounds lay trampled and empty. Lanterns shattered, tables overturned. The fiddler's bows snapped in half and forgotten in the dirt. People moved quiet, deliberate. Men hammered boards over broken windows. Women swept glass into piles that glittered sharp in the weak sun. Children darted between them, small hands gathering shards like treasure, then dropping them again when mothers called soft warnings. No one laughed. No one spoke loud. The town was breathing, but it sounded different now. Shallow, careful, like a man with cracked ribs. Wyatt Harlan stood at the window of the sheriff's office, coat off, sleeves rolled to the elbows. The badge lay on the desk behind him. Catching a thin bar of light, he watched the street without really seeing it. Fingers resting on the sill where the wood was still warm from yesterday's fire. His shoulder ached where a stray splinter had grazed him. Nothing serious, just enough to remind him he'd been there. He hadn't slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Clara's face in the doorway. Blood on her apron, eyes steady but hollow. He stepped outside. The boardwalk creaked under his boots. He walked toward the saloon without hurry, the way a man goes to visit a grave. Clara was already there, standing in the middle of what used to be the main room. Charred beams sagged overhead, the bar a twisted ruin of blackened oak. She held a broom in one hand, the other arm wrapped in clean linen where the bullet had torn through. The bandage showed faint pink at the edges. She didn't turn when he approached. Wyatt stopped a few paces back. "Ma." She swept once, slow. Dust and ash rose in a small cloud. "They say the roof will have to come down before we can start again," she said. Her voice was steady, but thinner than before. "Frame's sound enough. We'll rebuild." He looked at the wolf's head, still scorched into the bar top. Half melted now, but unmistakable. "You don't have to do it alone." Clara set the broom against a post. She turned then, eyes meeting his. "We will build it back," she said. "But this time there'll be a room in the back, tables, chairs, place for folks to meet when trouble comes knocking, so no one stands alone facing the wolves." Wyatt felt something shift inside him. Not relief, not pride. Just the quiet weight of knowing she'd already accepted the scar. He nodded once. "I'll help swing the hammer." She gave a small, tired smile. "I know you will." Further down the street, Reverend Elias Thorne had opened the church doors wide. A small crowd gathered, not for sermon, but for something quieter. Folks carried sacks of nails, bundles of lumber, jars of coins, and folded bills. They laid them at the altar steps without ceremony. Thorne stood among them, hands clasped, speaking low. No one cheered. They just nodded, one to another, and went back to work. Emma Sparks Whitaker sat on the church steps, telegraph key balanced on her knee. She tapped out the first message of the morning. Short, careful words about a new alliance, about towns watching out for each other, about not waiting for the next storm. The wire sang back faint replies from Pine Gap, from Willow Creek, from places that had heard the smoke on the wind. Wyatt walked past the church, boots quiet on the dirt. At the edge of the fairgrounds, little Sarah Voss played with a cluster of children near the corral. She laughed once, high, clear, when a boy tossed her a stick like a lance. Harlan Black Voss stood a short distance away, deputy badge pinned crooked on his coat, watching her with the kind of stillness that comes from knowing you almost lost everything. Sarah glanced up, saw him, and ran over. She hugged his leg without hesitation. Voss rested a hand on her head, gentle, uncertain, like he still didn't trust himself to hold on too tight. Wyatt stopped and watched. The girl's laughter carried across the street, small and bright against the quiet. He felt it in his chest, something loosening, something that hurt less than it should have. He turned back toward the office. The wanted poster of Cade Black Harlan lay in the dust of the road, caught by a stray gust. It tumbled once, twice, then lodged against a fence post. Wyatt bent, picked it up, folded it once, and tucked it into his pocket. No ceremony. Just the end of a thing. He reached the office steps, paused. The thunder rolled again, far off, soft, rolling across the ridges like an old friend saying hello. Not a warning anymore. Just a reminder that storms pass, but they leave marks. Wyatt picked up the badge from the desk. He pinned it on slow, fingers steady. The metal felt cooler now, heavier in a different way. He stepped outside. The street was waking, hammers ringing steady, voices calling low, children running with purpose. A few people looked up as he passed. They didn't cheer, they didn't bow. They just nodded. Once, quiet the way folks do when they've stood together in the dark and come out the other side changed. Wyatt kept walking, toward the saloon ruins, toward the church, toward whatever came next. The thunder rolled once more, softer now, fading into the mountains. And somewhere in the quiet, the town kept breathing, scarred, quieter, but still here. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Your presence means more than you know. If today's story awakened something inside you, don't let the trail end here. There are many more tales of courage, devotion, and faith waiting to be discovered. Subscribe, comment, share, and come back as we continue this unforgettable journey. Thank you, truly. Aviso legal barra disclaimer. All stories are intended solely for entertainment and may include fictionalized scenarios or dramatization derived from historical contexts. While AI assists in production, human creators supervise and adjust every piece to maintain sincerity, credibility, and emotional quality. We adhere entirely to platform regulations regarding AI content, ensuring no deepfakes or misleading portrayals. Licensed materials are used responsibly. Republishing, modifying, or extracting content without authorization is not allowed. We appreciate every viewer who respects originality and creative effort.